Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I live in a ridiculously small town in Vermont called Jay. We're right along the Canadian border. Aside from the town having very few businesses, we are also overshadowed by Jay State Forest and Jay Peak. We are in the middle of nowhere. It was Christmas Day and it was just me and my single mom. Also, I am not a child anymore. A teenager, yes, but I am not exactly thinking Santa is going to show up. We knew the year would be low-key and quiet, so we just lined up a few movies to watch and made steaks for dinner. In this part of Vermont, it wasn't uncommon to see a moose or a deer family come through from the forest past our home. The town was quieter than usual because of the holiday. This brought down more raccoons and bears than usual, looking for food in the cold Vermont winter. Hearing the bashing of trash cans became part of everyday life, and this Christmas was no different. We FaceTimed with my sister, who is living in New York City. We also spoke to my aunt in California. The day was fairly ordinary, and the food was good, but again, dinner just like any other day. We gave each other a few gifts, but even that felt underwhelming. I was looking forward to my mom going to sleep, so I could play video games and not feel like I was ignoring her. The PlayStation was in the living room, which overlooked the road in front of the house. On the opposite side of the road was the forest. The television sat in the corner next to the window, so it is hard to not see movement outside, even when you are sucked into a big game. Around 11 o'clock at night, after my mom had been asleep for a while, I heard more trash cans banging around in front of our house. I had taken the trash out earlier, and the dinner scraps were in there. I figured it was a raccoon trying to get whatever was left on the bones to bring back to its family. But as I tried to ignore the noise, it got louder, like something was digging to the bottom. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement and could tell that it wasn't a raccoon. Probably a bear? I thought I should look so I could make sure whatever it was. Chances were good that it would just run away if I scared it. It wouldn't get aggressive or try to come for the house. I told my online friends that I needed to step away because something was getting into our trash. They laughed because none of them live anywhere near as remote as us. I laugh with them because I watch animals dumpster dive all day. My laughing stopped though when I saw what was actually outside. I pulled aside the curtain and could see something, very human-like, bending over into the trash can. Human-like, but completely covered in fur. It was not shaped like a bear. My breathing must have become heavy because one of my friends could still hear me and started asking if I was alright. All I could say was that I needed them to hold on one more second, my voice cracking with fear and disbelief. My eyes widened as a guttural growl resonated from behind the garbage cans in the alley. Something was there. The next thing I knew, the creature emerged, and the sight of it made me start to short circuit. Its eyes were glowing with an unnatural, sinister yellow light, and they were fixed on me through the window. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a predatory glint that I had never seen in any animal. They seemed to pierce through me. The face was hideous, a terrifying blend of man and beast. Its snout was filled with razor-sharp teeth, exposed in a snarl that could send the bravest person running. It was like a werewolf, but more man-like than dog-like. The head was adorned with a ragged mane of dark, matted fur, and the ears were pointed and alert. Its body was muscular, the strength evident in its broad shoulders and thick arms that ended in gnarled claws. Its torso tapered into a lean waist, and its legs were powerful, designed for both running and standing. It stood on its hind legs, displaying an unnatural balance and poise. From what I could see, it looked about 7 feet tall, a towering figure that seemed to defy nature. Its posture was erect and it carried a sense of authority, like a leader among its kind. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It seemed to study me too, perhaps contemplating its next move. The creature wiped its mouth of whatever he was tearing through in the garbage, but continued staring at me. I couldn't think and had forgotten I had my friends on the headset. They were trying to get my attention, but all I could do was stand there, thinking that either I was seeing things or I was gonna die. I noticed that the Christmas lights from the window were still on, as well as the tree. I put my controller down and reached for the plug, not taking my eyes off the creature. He looked angry, as if me looking at him disturbed his meal. He looked like he would pounce if I were standing outside closer to him. I pulled the lights out of the wall, which seemed to startle him. He jumped a bit, knocking over the trash can and making a loud noise. I heard my mother jump out of bed, so she must be hearing it too. Just then, he took off in the direction of the forest. My mother came downstairs and stared at me silently, in shock. She must have seen it too, but didn't know if I had and didn't want to scare me. My friends were still on the headset trying to get my attention. I snapped out of it and told them I had to go, that my mother needed me. We both went outside to pick up the trash in the trash can. The whole time we didn't say a word to each other. I don't know how much she saw, but I know that I saw a lot. I don't like living here anymore. I've already made plans to move down to the city and live with my sister. Sometimes it's the little things that stick with you. Well, I wouldn't say this was a little thing, but it certainly started out that way. It was 1997 and I was working as a park ranger at the time, working in the Shenandoah National Park. I'd been there for about a year and loved it. The pay wasn't great, but the benefits were good, and I got to be outside all day, every day. That part of it was perfect. There were 2 other rangers on my shift, the day shift. We worked 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. with a 1-hour lunch break in the middle. My partner's name was Tim, and he was from the area, having grown up just down the road in Madison County. He knew this area like the back of his hand and had been working as a park ranger for several years before I came along. I was still fairly new to the area though, so Tim would often give me little tidbits of information about where we patrolled each day, or things he had learned over time while working there. One afternoon during our lunch break, he told me about some strange happenings that colleagues were talking about that had occurred at Bear Creek Lake State Park a few hours south of us. Tim said that he had heard stories from other rangers about strange sounds coming from the woods around the lake down there. He said that people thought it sounded like a woman screaming, but that it was much too loud and shrill to be human. He also said that he had heard some of the other rangers say that they thought it might be a Sasquatch or Bigfoot down there, but he didn't really believe in such things. I listened to Tim's story with interest, but I must admit I didn't put too much stock into what he was saying. After all, this was Virginia, and we're not exactly known for our Bigfoot sightings. At least not that I knew of. Besides, we were in the middle of a national forest, and there were plenty of animals out there making strange noises. It could have been anything. I mean, bears certainly made plenty of noise when they screamed at each other during mating season, and deer could be pretty shrill when they watched over their fawns. So I simply filed Tim's story away in my mind and went back to work. Bear Creek was far enough anyway that I didn't worry about it. That afternoon, we patrolled the north side of our area. We had a fairly large area to patrol, but it wasn't too bad since we could drive most of the time and only had to walk for a few minutes each hour. But it was during one of those walks that I first heard what could only be described as sounding like what we had talked about earlier, the Bear Creek Lake Screamer. We were walking along an old gravel road that led down to a small creek that fed into the lake. The trees were fairly thick here and there was still some deadfall from recent storms, littering the forest floor that we were heading out to check. I remember hearing something behind us as we walked down the road but didn't pay much attention because deer often move through this area and sometimes even walk down this road. But then I heard it again. A loud cracking sound coming from somewhere in the woods just off the right side of the road, and then a screech. It sounded like someone stepping on a dry branch and breaking it, and then screaming, but it was much too loud and the sound was much deeper than normal. I looked at Tim, who had also heard the noise, and we both shrugged our shoulders. We couldn't really pinpoint what this one was. We kept walking down the road for a few minutes, when suddenly there was another loud snapping sound from off to our right. This time I noticed that the sound seemed to come from a fairly large tree that stood about 20 feet off of the road and had grown to 40 feet in the air. The top branches were moving as if something had just jumped from them down to the ground and moved away quickly. I looked at Tim again, who seemed just as surprised as me by what we saw, but neither of us said anything because we didn't know what it could be. I remember that my mind flashed back to Tim's story earlier in the day and wondered if maybe we had just encountered a Bigfoot. I kept that thought to myself though, not wanting to scare Tim. Besides, we were still in the middle of a national forest, and there were plenty of animals out there that could have made that noise. It could have been anything, right? Well, we eventually finished our patrol in that area without incident. But that afternoon we patrolled the south side of a assigned area, and as we drove down one of the roads there, I once again heard that same cracking sound coming from behind us. This time the cracking was much louder than before. Again, my mind flashed back to what we had seen earlier in the day, and I secretly wondered if this was another Bear Creek screamer. And then sure enough, the screaming pierced through the air. It was shrill and loud and sounded just like a woman screaming. I looked over at Tim, who had a look on his face that I have never seen before. But all he could do was just shake his head, saying, "I don't know what that is." We both looked around for a while trying to find the source of the screams, but never did pinpoint anything. To be truthful, we only really half looked because I don't think either of us really wanted to find anything. And also, it was getting late in the day, and that was a great reason to head back to the main office. So we eventually gave up looking for whatever it was and didn't have to feel too guilty about it. I thought about those sounds for a long time though, trying to work out in my mind what they could have been. And it didn't take me long to wonder if it could have been the Bigfoot Tim had talked about earlier. Like maybe it had traveled north and was now in our area. I mean, like I said, I didn't really believe in such things at first, but after hearing those screams, I'm not so sure anymore. Besides, Tim told me later on that he didn't want to admit this to anyone else, because no one else believed in these things, and they tended to just laugh at him. But he said he had heard the screams before and knew what it was. That it was the same thing they had been hearing down south. Personally, I've never heard them again, but I do still remember that sound like it was just yesterday, and I find myself becoming more and more convinced that it was a Bigfoot after all. It's one of those little things that continues to stick with me. I remember the wings, and it was all our town talked about for a while. The wings and also the fire. Our little community is particularly special. We're a small town just like every other small town. Our one benefit, if I had to pick one, is our proximity to the lake. It's beautiful. You'd know the one if I said it aloud, but I'm not telling this story to draw attention to me or even to the town itself. I just want to talk about the wings. I need to talk about them. I thought it was just me seeing them at first, and it's hard to imagine that it started with me. I don't want to imagine that. I was dreaming of them. At night, the wings came, and I remember hearing them before seeing them. It was a dream I didn't remember, but I do remember that I woke up and the rhythmic beating of those wings was stuck in my head, hard and steady like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The sound didn't leave right away either. I carried it into my day like a migraine. Sometime after lunch, it disappeared. But the sound was back haunting me when I woke the next morning. I kept it to myself. Whatever it was, I wasn't ready to welcome any sort of medical emergency into my life. That was the only explanation at the time. Then I saw them, or I remembered seeing them for the very first time. On the third morning, I could recall the sight of those fur-covered wings. Something between a bat and a moth, I thought. It was some creature my nightmares were inventing. And although I had the vision of those wings finally in my mind, I still couldn't imagine the size of them. I couldn't visualize the creature alongside anything from the real world. It was still intangible, still unknown. And I guess that's why I was comfortable talking about it with my neighbor. She told me she'd seen the wings too. She said they had come clearly to her for the last few nights. She didn't know what it meant either. She only knew that they scared her. We were surprised, I think, that something had imprinted on the both of us so strongly that our dreams became linked. Had something flown over the town? We wondered. Had a movie come out recently with a wicked bat as the antagonist? We tried to laugh it off and invent a story that made sense. But we weren't alone in our discovery. It was my neighbor, as well as her neighbor, and theirs after them. All of us in the town had dreamt of these wings. And when we discovered that, all of us were frightened. It became real then, especially as the dreams intensified. Soon, it wasn't just the sound or the shape that we could see. In my dreams, the entire creature was revealed to me. While I had expected a bat or some sort of prehistoric monstrosity, the real monster was somehow worse. It looked like a man. His body was covered in short brown fur, obscured by dark circular patterns that seemed to move when you stared at them. His eyes glowed a bright red, and the wings, of course, were his own. The dream never left us. Each night it was clearer. Each night more of the figure was illuminated. The monster grew so bright that eventually we could see what was casting that light as well. Great orange-licking flames, flames the size of buildings. We knew by then that the creature was larger than us. We all had to look up just to meet its gaze. That meant the fires were historic in size, enough to engulf our town and all of the trees around us. But the longer it continued, the less we could do to try to cure ourselves of the vision, the rarer our conversations became. None of us wanted to admit the reason that we couldn't sleep. We just wanted to live our lives and forget the wings that were haunting us. Then, perhaps even faster than it had begun, the vision stopped. The town breathed a sigh of relief. We thought our nightmares were over, and for the first time in a long time, we enjoyed a day of peace. When the sun began to set, someone screamed. Fingers pointed at the sky, and we saw it. We saw the figure in our dreams flying over our rooftops. It cut in and out of the shadows. The dusk was hardly bright enough to frame it. Only red eyes were clear in the creeping darkness. It was there. It was real. We could all see it. But with it came the fire. And suddenly our very last concern was the monster we'd seen in the sky. The trees were ablaze. The sky was smoke. We were evacuated as quickly and as efficiently as we could. Not everyone made it out of our town. The fires came too fast and we were too disoriented. Some of us, I think, thought that we were only dreaming. We stood around as the fires closed in and thought that we'd wake up before we burned. Most of the town was saved. Firefighters from all over rose to the occasion and saved the pieces of our lives that hadn't yet been covered in soot. After that, things were supposed to return to normal. In most ways, they did. The fires were extinguished and the dreams were gone. We were allowed to sleep again. But that didn't mean we'd forgotten. That didn't mean we didn't sometimes hear those wings on the wind. That didn't mean we couldn't see the fear lingering in the eyes of our neighbors. We became a quiet town, but now I think that was a mistake. I think the only way to escape those wings is if I finally talk about them. So, that's what I'm doing here. Thanks for listening. Hi, Donovan. I'm writing in today with a weird thing that happened to me. I hope you like it. I've told this story to friends recently, and one of them listens to your podcast. He told me I should write in and see if there'd be any interest in this encounter I had. I want to start off by saying that paranormal experiences never happened to me. I had a pretty standard childhood and am currently in my mid-30s. This experience, which happened when I was 25, was my first. For context, I had just graduated college but was having a hard time finding a job in the area where I went to school. Eventually, the lease on my apartment ran out and my parents offered to let me stay with them until I found some work. My parents had moved to a smaller town not too far away a few years into my college career. They, like many parents, wanted something smaller. One story because my dad has bad knees and just quieter in general. The town they moved to had more in it than my hometown, so they were close to stores, hospitals, post offices, and all that. Overall, I liked the house. It was cute, small, but fit the way their lives were going. They offered me the second bedroom, which was just being used for storage, and I moved in with a temporary setup. Their bedroom was on the other side of the house with a kitchen and a full bathroom between, so we had some privacy. For the first week, I just hung out with my parents, enjoyed a few home-cooked meals, and took it easy. Eventually, I needed to get to work trying to find a job. I had a laptop, but to give my parents some space, I'd usually head down to the local library and hang out in their community room. I spent a lot of time there the first few weeks just getting my resume up and running, joining job sites, searching, etc. I secured a handful of interviews and was able to spend a little more time at home relaxing before I went to work full time. The first experience I had was in the middle of the day. I'm a little ashamed to say I was actually taking a nap at the time. My parents were out shopping and I took advantage of a quiet house and passed out. I'm not sure how long it was after dozing off, but I woke up just feeling like someone was in the room with me. At first, I was thinking my mom had come to wake me up. I opened my eyes just a tiny bit, in that half-awake state where your eyes aren't really open, but you can still sort of see what's around you. My room was dark, but something caught my attention. There was a figure standing near my door and it looked almost beige in color. This made me blink a few times, trying to wake up and understand what I was seeing. Propping myself up on my elbows, I squinted to get a better look. I saw what seemed to be a ghost. I know it sounds strange, but that's the only thing I could think at the time. It looked like a young guy, just standing there, staring off into the room right past me. His form was vague and hazy, and he was varying shades of a soft beige color. I noticed him shifting from foot to foot a little, like he was restless or uncomfortable. Needless to say, I snapped awake, but I was too stunned to say anything or move. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. But even with all this fear and surprise, I didn't get the feeling that this was an evil spirit or anything like that. I held my breath, watching the ghost as closely as I could without moving. Everything in the room seemed to be frozen, like time itself had stopped. After maybe 30 seconds, something incredible happened. The ghost just began to dissipate, slowly fading away. It was like watching fog vanish in the morning sun. I thought about asking my parents about this, but decided not to, knowing I would sound silly and they would think I was just messing with them. For the next few days, I didn't see the ghost again, until one night when I woke up and he was in the same corner. I turned on the light on the nightstand, but he still didn't seem to notice me. This time he stuck around longer, maybe 5 or 10 minutes before dissipating again. For about 3 weeks I saw the ghost on and off, only ever in the spare bedroom in the same spot. He never spoke, moved, or indicated that he was aware I was in the room too. About 2 months later, right before I moved out and into an apartment nearby, I casually asked my parents who had owned the house before them. Another couple their age, they told me, with a few kids. I pried a little bit to see if they knew of any accidents, but didn't ask outright about deaths. They definitely picked up on the odd question and I let it drop. I've never found out why the ghost appeared in that room, and my parents have never brought up seeing him. Part of me thinks because he disappeared for my last few weeks there, and I never saw him again, that it was just a random event, maybe a spirit trapped in a loop that finally got free. At this point, I'll probably never know since it's been so long. I feel weird about bringing it up with my parents. They still live there, so maybe they'll catch sight of him one day if he ever comes back. But the experience made me realize that there's a lot more going on around us than any of us is aware of. I was driving home on an isolated road through thick mountain country. It was late and dark, and I honestly couldn't have told you where I was. All I knew was that I needed to stay on the road that I was on until I finally left the state and hit home territory. I was bobbing in and out consciousness. You know how it is when you're exhausted and trying to push on. I had tried and tried, and I didn't want to admit it. I had even chugged a Rockstar not too long before this, but my body was so exhausted that even the caffeine and the extra boost of that wasn't giving me what I needed. And I was too cheap to spend the money to lay up in a hotel. It became really hard when the rain began to fall, since that sound could put anybody to sleep. I was notorious for using white noise to help me sleep anyway, so that was just the nail in the coffin for me. However, when I was coming up on a bridge, this is where my story happened. My headlights lit up something that looked just like a person, except almost double, if not triple, in size. I had to swerve to avoid it, and I sure as hell woke up from that. I wasn't sure if I clipped him or her or it, but my car went sliding and went straight into a ditch. The first thing I did was get out to make sure that I hadn't just hit somebody. Why would there be somebody out here in the middle of nowhere that's wearing all black? There was no one around, and I was pretty sure that there had been somebody in the road. I was certain of it. And I was more than a little mad at them for not making sure I was okay. I swear, it felt like the rain had just begun, but my car was good and stuck, and the tires wouldn't grip the mud that was suddenly all on the ground. I didn't want to call for a tow truck, but it was looking like my only option. I sat in my car in the sound of the downpour and tried phoning out when I was sure I had seen movement. That was more than just the rain. I was hoping it was help, but looking around, it didn't show me anything to speak of. I shook my head, wondering if it would be a good idea, just to sleep right here in the ditch and wait for the tow truck. It might be a little weird, but after all, maybe a good 45-minute nap is what I needed. My thoughts were shaken from my head when the driver's side window was suddenly blocked by the drenched, furry body of something very tall and ugly. It was walking on two legs, but there was no way that this was human. This was a beast of the woods, the closest I've ever come to thinking of some animal as demonic. I never used that description, but this was so ugly and evil looking. It's the only word that I feel would be appropriate. It was pointing its snout right at me and baring its teeth in a menacing grin, like it was smiling at me. Like it was happy that I was trapped in this little metal container called a car. I briefly pictured those long yellow fangs sinking into my flesh. In fact, the worst part was its eyes. There was no soul in them. They were alive only with a strange cold light. I'm not exaggerating. They almost had a faint glow to them. It was supernatural in a sense. The dimness of the weather made that very clear. It ran its claw on my window, which made a squealing sound, and that's about the point that I lost complete bladder control. It was so sadistic, so evil. It drug its claws slowly over my window, all while maintaining a stare and a grin, like it was letting me know, haha, you're stuck in there. There's no way you can run, nowhere you can hide. You're all mine, but I'm going to make you terrified before I kill you. That's the impression I got from this thing. Those claws were way too long for any practical purpose other than killing. I quickly jammed the lock button on my door, just in case it was smart enough to use the door handle. We continued a horrible stare down for what felt like ever. Another wolf thing came out from the downpour, and then another one. I think in total, I spied 4 separate ones altogether. This was at the time when old man phones were the current phones, and I flipped my phone open. Needless to say, I tried to get pictures, but they were crap. It looked like I had taken pictures of a movie playing on my TV. All at once, these things disappeared, and I found out why. A farmer-looking type of guy pulled up on the road and volunteered to pull me out of the ditch. After the job was done, I thanked him profusely and told him that I had almost become lunch for animals that I'd never seen before. I explained to him, assuming he had saw them, that they were upright wolves that looked like they were from hell. He got a look on his face, and after that, I tried to ask him questions, but he seemed very dismissive. I've held on to these memories all these years, but again, they're just memories. Even when I've tried to talk to a therapist about it, they don't even believe me. It's just one of the stories that you can't hold in. I saw something, and more of them. This was a pack of animals. I felt like I was in a werewolf movie, since they all looked very identical. Whatever this big one was, which was the biggest of all of them by the way, was only mere inches away from my face, separated by a very thin sheet of glass. The only reason I'm alive, I believe, is because of my car window. But then again, this thing was so menacing, so large, and so powerful, I feel like it was just toying with me. Because if it really wanted to kill me, I don't see any reason why it couldn't have ripped my door open and pulled me out and killed me. You can't just carry something like this for the rest of your life and not share it. I'm sharing this with you in hopes you can help me get this out there, to help quelch the fear of anybody else who feels invalidated by their own experiences and encounters or in fear of being mocked. I'm hoping that if you do read this, your audience can decide if I'm full of it or not. Regardless of that, I have the trauma and I will forever live with this story.